مساء الخير جميعا، واهلا وسهلا فيكم في هذا اللقاء من ضمن برنامج ديوان المعمار اللي بنتشرف فيه باستضافة المهندس سهل الحياري. كما اعلنا سابقا الحوار راح يكون باللغة الانجليزية، فراح اقدم اللقاء بالانجليزي. بس قبل ذلك اسمحوا لي بس اعقب بسرعة على هذا القرار، وهو يعني إدارة الحوار بالانجليزي، لانه وصلنا بعض الاستفسارات بهذا الخصوص. لقاءات الدارة عادة بتكون باللغة العربية باستثناء الحالات اللي الضيف بفضل يعبر فيها عن أفكاره وموضوعه بالإنجليزي، وبهمنا دائما طبعا إنه الضيف يكون مرتاح باللغة حتى نستفيد قدر الإمكان من تجربته ورؤيته. فحبيت بس إني أوضح شوي بهذا الشأن. Good afternoon everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. This conversation is part of the Diwan Al-Mimar series. We are very pleased to welcome our guest, Sahel Al Hiyari, who to many of you needs a little introduction. He is the principal of the Office of Sahel Al Hiyari for Architecture, an international award-winning practice with a portfolio that spans buildings, interiors, and exhibition design. He holds a Bachelor of Architecture and Fine Arts from the Rhode Island School of Design and the Master of Architecture and Urban Design from Harvard University Graduate School of Design. He has taught at the University of Venice, Harvard, and the American University of Beirut, and has led workshops, design workshops with the Center for Study of Built Environment as part of the Aga Khan program. In 2002, he became the first architect selected for the Rolex Mentor and Protégé Arts Initiative working with Alvaro Siza, and just recently he was awarded the Great Arab Minds Award in Architecture in recognition of his contribution to contemporary architectural practice in the region. Congratulations on that. This, of course, is only a brief introduction to what is an extensive career. But before we begin, if you just allow me a moment to frame today's conversation. For our first-time guests, Diwan Al-Mimar is a program at Dar al-Funun dedicated to discussions on architectural practice and associated questions within it. But being part of an arts institution, these conversations naturally extend further to questions about architecture's relationship to society, politics, economy, and culture, echoing the wider discussions we host here on art. In that spirit, many of our speakers over the past years have brought up questions on whether architecture as practiced today can still address the challenges within these domains, whether the tools of architecture remain adequate, or whether its position within the service industry limits its capacity to respond to a lot of the challenges that we face. Among younger architects especially, there is a sense of disillusionment, doubt over whether architectural practice in its current form can truly instigate change, and of course, there are also the economic grievances that weigh heavily on the profession. In this light, having a conversation with Sahel, whose practice has remained deeply committed to design, form, and material, and who has worked largely from within the industry and at its very center, regionally speaking, allows us to consider these questions from another perspective. Through his view and experience, we will probe a lot of questions, what architectural practice sets out to achieve, what it can achieve, and how one navigates the complex terrains and entanglements that shape the industry today. So today's conversation, just to set expectations, will not move along a linear career path or survey projects, although there is a lot to talk about there. Instead, it will take the opportunity to reflect on the broader and more foundational concepts of practice. In fact, maybe some of the most basic ones. So it's going to be quite general in that sense. We are fortunate to have Sahel with us for this candid reflection, and we will be in conversation for about an hour, after which we will open the floor to question. And so on that note, let's get straight into it. I want to start with you from quite a personal perspective. When you first started practicing architecture, or even during your education, what did you think architecture could do to this world? And was there a promise you had attached to it? And does that promise, now many years on, still hold?
Thank you. Thank you very much for hosting me, and welcome to everybody who's here. I'm very glad and honored to be here. Actually, your questions is multifold. I mean, it's several questions in one. But if I were to reflect back on my early practice, and I think even my student days, that question of what architecture can do to the world really never ever occurred to me. I only thought of what could architecture do to me as a person, how could it transform me from within? And as I sort of continued my studies and started to learn about architecture, its histories and trajectories, and with that knowledge, it became very clear to me that when architecture attempts to kind of homogenize the world into one thing, it kind of risks falling into the realm of utopia, which we know very well, especially with the modern movement, has collapsed in terms of its visions for the city and its social engineering and so on and so forth. So I think the question would be a different one, is how can, for me, how can I gain certain skills through the discipline of architecture to kind of produce work with enduring qualities. And I think this was the most important thing for me as I started my career. And I think it is a question right now that is still has a lot of relevance. So so yes, this is the world is not one thing. It's many things, and I think as such, architecture and how it can change the world is something that comes with collective efforts, with fragments, with many people doing different things, and so on. So,
can I mean, there's a lot packed into that point, but maybe just first, I mean, if I ask you just to clarify what you mean by enduring qualities, in what sense do you mean that?
Enduring qualities in the sense that I have to say it this way and describe it this way. I have a very ADHD mind that jumps from one place to another. And one of the things I love about architecture is the capacity of designing something that keeps me transfixed in that moment. And that's an enduring quality. An enduring quality as well could be something that is, for lack of better words, timelessness, or something that lasts for a long time, and something that is not contingent to the fashions and trends that we get in architecture. So I think this is how I can explain it in a personal manner and in a more general manner.
I think I'm just kind of, maybe just to set up, I think, some aspects of this conversation, I'm trying just to kind of figure out, I think, some of the, the dispositions that you have in your practice before we kind of get into the deeper conversations. I think from the way that I see, I think a lot of your buildings, the works that you've done in exhibitions, material and form are definitely, they play a central role. And maybe kind of the question that I have is, do you see the power of architecture actually lying, primarily in those faculties alongside, I think, the more perhaps kind of, the qualities that you've just described. Why, is that a fair assessment, I think, of the practice?
Well, form and material is actually what the built environment is made of. So, and if you look at it this way, all architecture is that. But if that begs the question also, is every single construction architecture? I don't think so. I mean, I think there's a massive difference between construction in the manner that you encounter sort of on a large scale, and architecture, which has more intent, which is something more nuanced and it's something more related to culture, to heritage, and to history, among many other aspects. So I think in my case, when sort of material and form sort of are combined to produce other things. And they are combined by other means, by means of geometry, by means of typology, for example, references, memory, and so on. So you can't really reduce it to only that. Yeah.
So I think part of at what stake in kind of in what you're saying, I think, and if I were to kind of reduce it into some sort of definition about architecture, I think, not in that kind of very reductive manner, is that we're saying that the practice of architecture, in your view, is not necessarily about building buildings or construction only. There is an extra.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that to you, does that lie, I think, in a social political practice, a mode of expression, a phenomenological quality that we're talking about, or?
It can be all of the above, but in my case, I think it's sort of the employment of, again, to mention what you said, it's, let's say, it's form and it's material and space sort of combined to summon presences that are that reveal latent narratives, or that reveal sort of kind of a memory, or let's say, or that can impact an emotional or perceptual field. So yes, it can be phenomenology as well, but in a nutshell, it's that really. Yeah.
Can I? That's I think quite a. That's a very, I think, interesting and clear definition in that sense. But what is, where do you think the power of uncovering those latent potentials lies within kind of, the wider, question of in wider collective presences? Why is it that we, why is it, do you think, that architecture should take on its onus actually to try and surface those potentials?
I'm not saying it should or it shouldn't. I think it's inherent to it, because I mean, all architecture that we, you encounter or experience is sort of, is like language. It's a word related to another one, to a third one, creating sentences and creating a certain trajectory in history. So, I mean, even if you resist it, let's say, it's still there. That the act of resistance of that is in itself a reference to that. Do you know what I'm saying? And here we're talking about, like, let's say, reference. I mean, we're sitting here in a space that is kind of embedded in our collective memory, so it's bound to come out one way or another if you allow it to. And I think it's this with my work, is that I allow it. It's I don't reject it. It's yeah.
I mean, I think especially when we kind of get into those questions, I think, and you mentioned this, I think, early on, in terms of kind of this, if I were kind of to say this disintegration of form, this kind of this idea that experiences have become kind of fragmentary and with that, the language of architecture. So I think, to my mind, you think of classical orders on one end, you think of perhaps how we sometimes view Islamic architectural history, in the sense that there is this kind of collective style, language, spatial experience or principle, I think, that underlies that. And my question is that kind of part of where we're thinking, is that kind of the latent potential, this idea that architecture should carry those ideals in its embedded form, or are we kind of talking at kind of a more expressive, individual artistic level?
I have a lot of hesitance when it comes to saying things like should or shouldn't, right?
Fair.
So
fair point.
it should for me.
Yeah,
let me put it this way. So, but I mean, if you're talking, for example, about the classical order, I mean, this is one thing, and it's kind of you can look at it as an intersubjectivity that over time became some kind of a rule of beauty. In Islamic architecture is very different, because it occurred with many, many facets and many cultural sort of expressions. So they're really very different, but they are also connected. Sort of the sense, the ideals of geometry and the ideals of proportion and so on, is what you can sort of say is the thing that somehow binds them in a very indirect way. And I think understanding this as an architect and appreciating this as an architect for my work is very important, because a lot of my work references that, not through a direct sort of literal representation of that, but through a presence that is a familiarity that you might see it or might not see it. And sometimes I discover it years later. You know, I look at a project and then I say, this is that. You know, I have, and it was not intentional. Yeah.
I think that certainly kind of becoming, I think, much clearer in terms of kind of actually, you know, what kind of those references and how you're talking about them. I think where, you know, I'm just, you know, there might not be kind of one answer, but I think one question that I think is occurring in my mind, I think, you know, concurrently as you're speaking, is what's the, you know, what is the purpose of that reference? Is it, you know, do you think it gives a sense of stability in a world of uncertainty? Is it about creating continuity with traditions that perhaps we sometimes feel that we're rupturing away from, or is it something else?
Really, that's a tough question. What's the role of that? It's like saying, what's the role of why do we appreciate history? And then I think one should look at it in a different way and say, why do we like history? Why do you like ancient ruins, for example? What about them is, what is attractive about them? And I think embedded in that question is the answer, is that precisely these things that I'm talking about, these certain rules and measures and positions in terms of making a space or making a building, if they are translated into contemporary work, that energy sort of permeates it, right? And it gives you that feeling of familiarity and comfort and so on. I think familiarity is very important, you know.
I mean, I think in many senses, I think a lot of what you're saying, I think I certainly also see in the work in practice. I mean, just kind of, I think for a lot of the visitors who might have come in from the top gateway, the facade of Dar al-Funun was designed by Sahel. And what you see there is this kind of mirroring of these stones, you know, the kind of the Dar al-Funun limestone in kind of rhythm into kind of the cement blocks in perth-rooted kind of fashion. So you are actually feeling that you are going on that kind of temporal journey in time, referencing what is past, but in a way that I think really uncovers kind of, I think, you know, a different material quality to that whole experience.
I can comment on this in a different way as well. This is an early work of mine, but I think throughout my entire journey, sort of from being a student to practice, I've always looked at the world through a lens that refracted everything, internalized it, and brought it out in a different way. And I think all architects do that, you know. And I think part of the thing sometimes that works against us is when we set ourselves certain rules, when we have to rationalize everything and say, you know, I can't do this because there is no reason to do that and this, that, and the other. And I think that in itself is really unfortunate, because what that does is it undermines something very important in design process, which is intuition, right? I mean, you know, Greek philosophers thought of knowledge being embedded in the psyche, and the idea is to coax it out through a conversation, like, yeah.
And
the Socratic method, let's say, yeah.
And this idea of kind of actually whether or not, you know, and I think that's very fair, and I think perhaps also speaks to the earlier avoidance of the word should, in the sense that actually we're not going, you know, in a sense it's about perhaps letting that process guide you. But I think what's for me actually very interesting, and it's been a while since I've heard about it, is that actually there is really a bit of a connection between, you know, architectural kind of practice and what I think we often see as artistic expression somehow. And what, you know, what happens with what you're saying is kind of perhaps these personal internalizations to once we enter the collective field, once we enter the collective space and share it beyond, does that place certain limits, I think, on what you can and cannot do, kind of in terms of those basic expressions, if that question is clear?
I kind of missed the question. Could because of the
yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think
are you
gotten suddenly very? I think, especially when we get into, you know, a lot of how you're speaking, I think, about the way that we kind of internalize spaces, sequences, and material kind of realities.
Memory, yeah.
There is, I think, a bit of an artistic expression in the way that you're speaking, kind of about all of this, and one that actually is not afraid of personal subjectivity somehow in the way that you're processing these spaces. And I wonder, because in the end you are an architect practicing within kind of the service industry, once you enter into collective sphere, whether with clients, with the city, with kind of wider realities, how do you start to kind of temper that conversation? Does it enter a more kind of...
It's a process of negotiation, obviously. It's not as simple as somehow, as you say, and you say artistic expression. I think it's the psychological makeup of all of us, that we look at things, internalize them, and there is also this whole idea of kind of collective meanings that that sort of stratify, you know, and then when you want to kind of express them, sometimes they come out on their own, and sometimes you have to negotiate them, and sometimes you make the wrong choices only to realize that kind of resisting the right choice is not the thing to do. You know what I'm saying? A lot of the times when I get stuck, let's say, in designing, I don't try to, I stop and I don't try to sort of impose an answer, but what I do is sort of surrender to the problem. And then when you surrender, this act of surrendering to the problem, there's a lot of magic that happens there. A lot of solutions come out that are kind of, you know, would have been invisible before. You know what
I mean, I think it to me it's, you know, on one hand, it's actually very interesting to hear, because, you know, I'm hearing you, I think, speak of really you know, what I think in many ways is you know, part of the unwritten kind of rules of the creative process, of the way that we act within them. But then my mind goes to, you know, budgets, you know, client demands, regulations that can often kind of be very, very rigid. And I think, you know, the question is you know, are these hindrances, I think, to these forms of expression? Are they hindrances to the ways that we try to, you know, imagine kind of these spatial sequences, these questions around form and unlocking latent narratives? You know, can you do all that while staying within the industry's constraints?
But you have to, otherwise it just will not happen, will not materialize. I mean, a project will not happen unless you really also surrender to the fact that there is a budget and there are requirements and there is sort of sometimes idiosyncratic, I don't know, you know, it has idiosyncrasies also. Each project has its own kind of set of rules. And it is about negotiating that. It is about kind of going around it, designing with it, and we live in a transactional world. I mean, everything is kind of related to the value of money, right? Whether we like it or not. I mean, and it's not a new thing. It has always been like that. nowadays it just, all other aspects have been put aside, and that has become the only condition, unfortunately.
And maybe kind of on that point, I mean, kind of, I think a lot of, architects whom, perhaps, I've spoken to, I think especially architects kind of now emerging, see, try to deal with that question and actually avoiding or withdrawing from architectural practice in terms of service industry altogether. For them, it is, almost, for them, they there is this sense that actually to instigate that kind of, vision or to manifest whatever kind of they are looking for within the service industry becomes kind of, a difficult project. And I'm not necessarily asking you, I think, to respond to that directly, but maybe, from your own perspective, is architecture only kind of in today in that, are there rooms for more than just service to kind of the industry in the ways that we actually practice or deal with clients or whatnot?
I mean, there is and there must be, but to a great extent, it's incredibly difficult to kind of circumvent that, to go around it, to subvert it into something else. I mean, nowadays, cities are made by developers, and then I ask the question, what kind of what kind of backgrounds do these developers have in terms of deciding the architectural future of a city? You know what I'm saying? This is so so you have that, and you have also projects that are being led by committees that have bizarre objectives and even stranger concerns that have nothing to do at the end of the day with how if this project will be beneficial to the public or not. So you have all of these aspects that you have to navigate through, right? And of course, and I get it, there's a lot of the young generation, they feel discouraged and they feel they don't want to continue that. And I understand it. But architecture is not only sort of sitting in a studio and designing. I mean, you could write about architecture, you could specialize in technical aspects of architecture, and all of these things are all equally important. You don't have to be a star architect, you don't have to. There is also that kind of measure of success for architects that is, it's sometimes grotesque. Is you are successful if you have built like a project of 1 million square meters. It's like, okay, who cares? So there are all of these aspects that young kids today are having to deal with, and they're not easy. They're not easy at all. And for me personally, I have been always very stubborn about what I wanted to do. I love the practice, and I've always will. Hopefully, I'll continue to do whatever it is I do, but it's about also insisting on what you feel is right.
Can you let us a bit into kind of that conversation? I mean, I think one thing, and we'll talk, kind of, in a second a bit more about kind of the residential works, but in most of the residential, I think, projects that at least I've seen, there is always something slightly out of convention, I think, in the way that we're thinking about material, about form, about craft and detail. And I'm sure, I think, for a lot of clients, it's well out of their comfort zone. I think in the way that they think. And the question is, how is it that you are? How does that conversation go somehow? Because I think that is, I believe, speaks to perhaps some of what you are kind of talking about in terms of negotiation, I think, on that more minute level.
Well, I think, yes, it is very difficult. First of all, it is incredibly difficult to do residential work, incredibly difficult because of the restrictions, and not only that, because it's not an easy sort of program to work experimentally with, right? You cannot be experimental and have that much freedom. So it is difficult. But on the other hand, what residential work has is the capacity of developing personal relationships with people. You're dealing on a much deeper level with the end users than kind of a committee that are ticking boxes and all of that. So that makes it this process of negotiation makes it very interesting. And then, as I said, you know, I always, if I hold my my ideas tightly when it's needed to be held tightly, and then I let go of the things that I can let go of. And it's again a process of compromise as well. You know, sometimes I compromise, but not to the point where the project becomes irrecognizable, right? So it's a very difficult balance to walk with residential, yeah. But it is also very satisfying because it's precisely because of that difficulty, and precisely because it's impossible almost to become experimental with it. And so when you do it, it's it's rewarding.
And kind of how does, I mean, you know, how is it that kind of you start to, because I mean I think that you're making a lot of decisions on people's, you know, kind of on the ways that people kind of live in a sense, and kind of trying to, you know, how is it that they relate to their own spaces and whatnot. And I think to go into that detail and kind of convince them to take, I think, aesthetic decisions that perhaps lie out of that. I mean, it's...
Well, that didn't occur over, you know, one day. It occurred over 20 to 30 years, you know, of doing this. You know, I had, the way I started, I had the first project, and I had sort of... the ambitions were very sort of controlled, and I did that. And then once that was successful, the next project, the ambitions became bigger and bigger, and to the point where there gets to, I get to a point where there is a little bit more of trust, let's say, with the clients. And I think that is very important. And I have been very blessed with the clients also. Maybe it's luck. I mean, they're really wonderful people, all of them. So it's all of these aspects together, right? And
I mean, on that note, I think that there is, you know, a critique that we've often, you know, spoken about, I think, in preparation for this conversation, that's often amounted at the work that it remains confined to the residential. You know, how do you respond to that? But actually, more than that, actually, what I'm interested in is do you see residential commissions as a limit or as a space actually where architecture can still grapple with the larger questions that perhaps we aspire to?
I'll answer the last question. I don't see residential buildings as limits. Okay, they are more difficult. Yes, their scale is not as impactful as other projects. Obviously, that's a reality. And they can have a lot of impact on education, on the city itself. They can have ripple effects as well. I mean, when I was a student, I studied a lot of residential projects of important architects, and they were references for us at the university. And so to say that it's limiting, I think it's, yeah. But about doing public projects, we have done residential projects, we have done a lot of public projects, right? In Jordan and outside Jordan, and I've also sort of proposed some public projects that, but unfortunately nothing has materialized. Now, there are two parts for this. I think one of the reasons is that when I deal with public projects, the objectives are usually, and the briefs come sometimes, they lack clarity, and they lack vision, and they lack objectives. And not only that, the requirements are a little bit absurd, and the timelines are impossible. So if you combine all of these things together, what do you get? You don't get my work, you get somebody else's work, or something done very quickly, and without this mindful reflection on what the project should and shouldn't do. Also, we live in Jordan. There isn't a lot of public work, or at least none of it that I'm aware of, and so that's an important part. And I think it's not the duty of the architect to do public work. I think it's like the systems that govern what gets done in public work. And if a country has a national project, for example, and they decide to sort of import designs from foreign architects, well, then what does that tell you? So it's there's a shared responsibility, I think, in terms of public work, and yeah.
I'm going to kind of get to your last point, I think, in a second. But I also, just because there is actually one more kind of thing that I do want to probe. I think in residential kind of work, but also perhaps part of, I think, some of what we brought up earlier in this conversation. I think you made it, I think, for me quite clear that a large part of how you see our architecture kind of manifesting is in its capacity to unlock through material and form, through spatial sequence, through this kind of this more than just, I think, material quality. There is an image, a reference that's being unlocked.
Feeling as well,
feeling,
how it feels,
and that kind of phenomenological level, and so I think when you're dealing with clients, I think on a more immediate level, you certainly come across this question of taste. Who is the architect responding to? Whose taste should the architect respond to? And actually, is there? Do you think that it is one, to the client, to a wider paradigm in society, or is there something actually different altogether? Because I think that's perhaps, I think, one of the primary faculties we're talking about when we are talking about, I think, expectations of patronage, of subjectivity, and kind of what I want to get built somehow.
Okay, taste is sort of a taboo. Nobody talks about it, right? Because it's it's usually dismissed as this personal preference. However, to me, taste is something a little bit deeper than that. I think it's a mediating faculty between judgment, perception, and culture. It's how you connect all of these things together. And taste also has a social dimension, which indicates education, class, and culture capital, right? It has a historical also factor which demonstrates sort of a certain type of evolution. The Baroque period is not like the modern period, ornament nowadays is something that is reviled, Anyway, so I think if taste is actually a result of it's a discernment that is achieved through knowledge and education and through analysis and through sort of a scholarly approach, I think it's very important. Now, whose taste do you follow? It's clear. I mean, if you are working with people who are educated and who and they don't have to kind of do researches on the history of aesthetics and philosophy and all of none of that, but at least there's a certain level of exposure somehow that allows them to create some kind of a discernment of what works for them or not. Then that taste is you can work with. But if it's the total opposite, if it's something else that doesn't sort of align with education, but it's sort of an expression of, I don't know, sometimes it's capital. I think this is here where you get off the elevator and you say, this is not going to work. But in a sense, I mean, I wish taste was taught at universities. I mean,
how would you teach it?
a class about, you know, of course it will be sort of aesthetic theory and all of that, and but it's something also that allows students to look at sort of this rich history without necessarily having the fear of kind of writing a paper about it or anything. It allows them sort of to develop an eye for things. I think it would be really good, especially here.
I can definitely understand why I think this could become kind of a touchy subject,
really
because as well, you know, there is this kind of, you know, I think at stake in what you're saying is that, you know, there's good taste, there's bad taste, there is somewhere there an objective metric
and it
for
is cultural. I mean, some countries the average taste is very good because of the type of education, right? I mean, Italy, for example, and I always say that they have two streams: the scientific stream and the literary stream field in high schools. And they learn, what do they learn? They learn philosophy, they learn theory of aesthetics, they learn art history at a young age. And so they are exposed, right? And this exposure allows them to develop, to appreciate not only kind of their culture and history, but to sort of be able to work within precise dimensions of design that are you know, refined, for lack of better word. So, yeah, it's also cultural, right?
I mean, I think one you know, one image, just to I think maybe try to concretize this. I mean, it's a reflection that I have, but I'm not, you know, I'm kind of trying to make sense, I think, of what you're saying at the moment. Is you in one of the residential buildings you have, I think, which has, you know, recently been quite you know, has gained, I think, quite a bit of popularity. You have this stone that's chiseled with really intricate craftwork. And I think, to me, there is something really interesting in that, in the sense that actually, yes, it is a residential building on one end. But kind of you've heightened the image of stone, which perhaps today gets, you know, quite often a bad rep, and somehow it you know, it creates kind of a different perspective onto that stone, I think, and brings it into quote unquote good or refined taste in that image. I mean, is that a fair, I think, argument to
maybe, but to go back to this idea is not actually an invention, but a reference, right? And a reference from residential buildings that you could see maybe from the 70s and possibly 60s, where they had these vertical courses of stone and it, you know, typically they would have been applied to one part of the building, leaving the other part in another kind of pattern. And what I did is take that and kind of inject it with steroids and make a whole building made of one gesture. And this becomes sort of very expressive. And especially also that the house does not have any windows. You know, you don't see any openings. You just see this material that somehow creates this rupture in the system where it sits, you know, but using the very same material that all of the buildings around it has it, so it's somehow still connected to it.
And I think for me, you know, where I'm really honestly not decided on this question of taste, I think at all. I think there is something there which, you know, which becomes, I think, even, you know, quite interesting, because you're it's as if kind of you are using those tools available to you to, I think, completely recast, you know, the whole question of craft, and that has real, I think, I believe, potential economic kind of implications. You're entering into this conversation where, you know, I'm demonstrating what can be done with this. through refinement, through detailed work, there is a bit of kind of showmanship in it, but in a sense that actually, potentially it renegotiates, I think, those faculties of taste as we perhaps kind of conventionally know. And I think it being done on a residential building alone is quite interesting in that sense.
To be honest, the sort of the craftsman who did this was good. I didn't really need to do so much. It was just the composition of the stone that lends itself to this aspect, that gave itself this aspect. So I'm using really the local know-how and the local craftsmen, but showing them other possibilities with the context we have. And the same thing happens at the interior of the building, where it's also like these vertical courses of gypsum, and they are also hand-hammered by hand. And so this whole idea of craft and the hand being present in the building is very important. I mean, there's a lot of work now that they go and cut it with machinery, and you can have wonderful, crazy shapes with stone. But to me, that wasn't sort of the essence of Amman, and I always like to project that essence of Amman, which has this, in its buildings, it has this human touch in it, and that's kind of beautiful, really.
I mean, I think one thing that I think is interesting, that just kind of from our previous conversations, that I think is worth kind of bringing up here, that you mentioned that sometimes actually you look at those buildings, and when you are driving around Amman, you see, not necessarily to this building, but I think to others, some kind of forms of replication, so almost of decisions that you've taken, I think, in design, but perhaps you feel that there is this infectious kind of...
There is, but it also probably happens to me, but my reference probably is, it could be a broken building on a highway, and that's my reference. But obviously, we work in kind of an ecology of exchange, where people exchange ideas, take some of the ideas. I mean, I love that if they take what I have done. And what I hope would happen is that they push it even further. I think this is more interesting than creating watered down versions of the work I've done. I mean, sometimes I look at, in one of the projects, I looked at a piece of steel that had rusted, and it stained the plaster cement, and it became a technique where I put kind of steel particles in the cement to create this patina and erosion that is more controlled, let's say. Yeah.
I mean, kind of to take you, I think, to the city at large, because I think this is a good, entry point there. And I think to this kind of collective, perhaps aesthetic kind of, senses of exchange. There was a time, I think, previously in Jordan, in the wider Arab world, definitely, I think, early 20th century, where you do feel that actually there is a movement, a sense of aesthetic harmony, I think, across architectural practices, across their trajectories. Maybe before kind of I ask you a bit more about that, is that something that you think is important to have or necessary, or?
I think at this point it's not necessarily to have a common tendency or a movement, but to have common objectives is more important. To look at certain problems, and it could be the simplest thing, a sidewalk. I mean, if all architects dealt with sidewalks within a specific sort of way, I think we'll have a much nicer city. I think tendencies are important, and I think and then again, I to quote the modern movement, it tried to kind of, it was like homogenizing, neutralizing, and almost it had these universal values that somehow were imposed on vast areas without really considering the culture, the climate, the topography, etc. of course, you know, what we had here is some kind of a homegrown modernity. But I think we are past this now. I think we have come to a point of being so homogenized, right, and so alienated that people are always looking for identity and individuality. And that's also a collapse in itself, right? And so, you know, it's I'm not sure that a movement would work unless there are objectives to tackle.
I think, yeah, kind of reacting to what you said, you know, perhaps I think one of the issues that maybe kind of in earlier movements of modernity, but even actually perhaps in history, is that universals and ideals are often projected from in very top-down manner. So actually you might have an aesthetic harmony at one level, but actually it is not reflected in societal cohesion, nor kind of a fabric that I think is there. So it becomes a form of a false universal. And I think maybe what you're talking about is almost this kind of more grasswork, cultivated
exactly. Not these sort of grand schemes and strategies of changing the world, because I think that always ends up some form of totalitarianism, and I don't think that's good. So yes.
But there was definitely, and I think now kind of just to get into that point where you said, you know, this, you know, I think part of also why that project was there was because I think early 20th century you had, you know, the state believing in the project of architecture. I think the Arab states generally. That today is not necessarily too much of the case anymore, I think, in my opinion and my read. And I think, you know, is it the discipline you think that has lost its capacity to imagine, or have people simply stopped?
It's become really an instrument that succumbs to, or that is reflecting power structures, market economies, social and political agendas, national agendas, you know. So in a way, architecture has become this sort of instrument, this marketing tool also, you know. I mean, nowadays, I mean, you look at it and it's used as a marketing tool, you know, and it uses sort of the most, the fastest sort of images, fleeting images that promise you sort of a utopian life, promises you perfection, when it is at the end of the day, it's a money-making machine, nothing more, right? So, you know, this is it. It doesn't have the agency, really, architecture. People think, I mean, you know, I always hear about, oh yes, we have to be sustainable and, you know, social consciousness and all of that. I agree with a lot of this, but architects do not have the agency. We are working within locked, rigid systems that that we follow. You know, to create the social project, it has to kind of trickle down from another location. I mean, we could do, for example, embedded acts of subversion to kind of, you know, pursue this idea of social responsibility, and then at the end of the day, everything we do as architects has a social responsibility and it's part of a social contract, right? But to work effectively, like, and I hear the architects, a lot of architects talking about that a lot. To work effectively, there needs to be some kind of paradigm shift in the consciousness of the powers that are moving the pieces, all these powers globally, and I mean globally. I mean, we're.
But when you talk about small acts of subversion, can you try to clarify what you mean by that?
It is the example of, let's say, I have done it in one project, and it's very difficult to explain it. And the project was for a complex in Egypt, And I created these buildings that hover above a public space, but the public space did not have a program. And they were telling me, what is the program? What's the program? How can we control it? And this, that, and the other. And I said, you cannot control it. It's open for the public. And so when you imagine a public space like that in Cairo, you know for a fact that it's going to be occupied, transformed, and transfigured by the people who are. So this is a small subversion. Not having a fence is a small subversion, right? You know, creating an urban setting that doesn't have these sort of measures of control, you know, using urbanism in a controlled manner is also you know, you could do these small things, right? Even in a residential building, I mean, like there is a social responsibility, let's say towards not only the clients, but towards the city, towards the people who are walking in the street. You know, you don't want to the quality of the city even, you know, how do you build a structure that has enduring qualities? Again, going back to this idea. So you know, these are small acts of subversion, and that can happen from intentional things, or that can happen from, you know, being just ethical with the work you do, you know.
I think kind of what, you know, part of what I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm correct, is, you know, some sort of admission that actually the architect on the wider kind of scale of the city does not necessarily have the agency or the capacity, I think, to intervene on that level. But almost kind of what you're saying is that you acknowledge, I think, kind of a smaller, more micro role in how you do this, and you take the small wins almost
it's a lot of small acts that can actually make a change, right?
And kind of, and I think it is interesting, I think, in the sense that kind of to put that onus, I think, on residential buildings, but also in the same spirit, actually, I think you do understand, I think, a lot of the grievances. I mean, we are dealing with some big problems in a sense, and
massive.
And I think to you know, perhaps I think, you know, to also echo, I think, some of the voices that we often hear here who are saying, you know, kind of we need to do away with, I think, the whole, you know, to really think completely outside of this industry standard and not kind of focus, I think, within that paradigm. Do you see some reason in actually those voices that are kind of trying to say, you know, let's take a completely different direction from the discipline as it currently exists. Let's take a different direction from even conceiving of architecture as a service industry, perhaps withdraw, I think, from those you know, transactional fields?
If you can, I mean, you do whatever you can. I mean, I really do not possess the answer for a lot of these questions. I mean, what I possess is maybe a sensibility and an attitude, right? So it's not, I don't have the answer. And you're proposing big questions and issues that, you know.
Fair. What, if you could today, and I think I'll end with this before opening it up for questions, unlearn one thing at the core of your architectural training, now, you know, several years onwards, what would that be?
I mean, there are two answers. I mean, I could tell you that, you know, the future lies in opening the discipline. The future is about kind of removing ourselves from independent silos and connecting to other disciplines, whether it's social sciences, chemistry, biology, medicine, and trying to come up with solutions that somehow have real effect on kind of like the trajectory of where we're going. That's one way of answering. The other way of answering, and for the fear of being pessimistic, I don't really see a future. I mean, I really don't. We are staring at extinction in the face. There is a collapse of ecologies globally. There is also social collapses that are going on. I mean, there is the destruction of communities. And we have, of course, Gaza to look at, which is, a genocide that done through an industrial war. And looking at that puts you in a very existential position. And I'm quoting a friend here. It's a discussion we had that when you really contemplate that, it puts you in this existential position whereby anything progressive is futile and hopeless. If we see this and it just continues like that.
I think on that note, and quite a provocative note, I think we can open it up to questions here. I think best maybe we take 2 questions at a time. Maybe.
Thank you very much for this talk. My name is Sanad Alwar. I'm a practicing architect from Milan in Italy. I guess my question would be, the built environment carries with it functionality. And for a building to have enduring qualities, going back to the theme of timelessness, what the public deems to be worthy is very important, I think. For example, the Roman theater that we have here is still being used in its original function that it was intended to house from the beginning, and it has withstood time, had seen emperors, kings, prophets. It's still there, people still use it beyond the materiality that it was made from. My question is, do you see any of the work that we're producing these days to have some of these enduring qualities? Or are we creating things very quickly without thinking about what are we making at the end of the day?
Sure. Do you have any other questions? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Tamer Snobar, and my question it's about the matter of taste in architecture, and I believe it's a major philosophers had major discussions about this taste matter, and in architecture philosophy we learned about the arbitrary and the positive, and which is the arbitrary, which is the taste matter or the cultural background or whatever which is not technical, and then we come to the positive, which is the right thing to do, the right thing to how to build and how to construct. Now, my question is, how can we tackle the positive issue in teaching architecture in our universities, and how can we relate our teachings to our geographical position in the world, and not only the history which we learn from the Europeans or the Americans or so forth and so forth. Thank you.
All right, so I think in terms of buildings of enduring qualities, yes, of course, being pragmatic about the building and having functions that last, and if a building is well designed, obviously, you know, this is a great thing. I am not sure nowadays things are done at an incredible speed, and I'm really against that, and I think this speed has compromised the quality of work in general. I mean, I face this problem as well with some of the projects, not with everything. But so in terms of who's doing that here in Jordan, I think there might be a lot of young talents that are creating very interesting work. I mean, I don't want to mention names, but there is. And so in that sense, I think to answer your question, yes, that speed has really compromised the quality. In general, also, the idea of taste is doing the right thing is the important thing. I mean, taste is, as I said, it's this faculty of connecting culture and perception, and so it is important to have that. If it's part of, if it's an educated kind of discipline. So I'm not sure I can answer the question of what you said, what you can do in the universities. There is a lot that can take improvement, I think. In terms of, I mean, I have a number of things, specific things that I can say, this should change and that should change, etc. But I think it's an ongoing project, I think, education, and especially education in Jordan. And what I'm hoping is that it allows students sort of more exposure. And I am completely against sort of this idea of only looking within. You have to look within, you have to look at the region and what it has within. But, we were always people who are open to the world, historically and so on. So I think it's important to bear that in mind, not to look in and to sort of create this dogma that the other is evil, and all of that is kind of counterproductive. I mean, you learn from all cultures that exist in the world. There is a vast history of architecture that you can learn from in different countries, and I think this is very important to know.
I mean, maybe kind of I'll just kind of press just a bit further onto that, because I think it does link us to, I think, another conversation, but I think one that is equally relevant, and I think you hear a lot of reverberations of in, I think, kind of the field today. And I think it's a question kind of pertaining to, whether it is, I think, a return to a particular kind of form of building, kind of outside, to try to rely on structures, prior to the 20th century, in a sense, to try and borrow from, I think, or search for a vernacular language, and the sense that actually the more we distance ourselves from that, we are also entering, I think, into a terrain where we are reforming our own societies in ways that I think, are outside of kind of, what is appropriate, I think, here culturally. And I think that is a question that definitely seeps into architecture quite a lot. Often kind of in critiques amounted, I think, to the vast use of concrete, the formation and typologies of particular spaces and domestic dwellings. I mean, where do you sit within that conversation?
The idea of looking back.
Looking back and trying to find these continuities, I think, with a lot of forms that arguably have been kind of disrupted on the term.
And my work is about that, actually. It is about sort of a retrospective look and analysis of kind of the history of the place of where I'm intervening and working. So it is about that. And it is about other things as well, but a big part of it is that. It's interesting because I think the idea of this looking back, I mean, there are articles that were written about this idea that when a culture reaches a point of exhaustion, what they do is kind of they revert to an archaic history, not to sort of revive it. I mean, to revive it, but in a sense to make sense out of the present and to restructure the present. And so this idea of looking back could be how do you say, an answer in looking at practices that were done with conventional architecture and rural architecture and so on. They had like embedded intelligence within them. So So I'm not against that. On the contrary, I mean, I think this is very important.
We have two questions, so here and there. Okay.
Hi, my name is Farah Saoudi. Back to the conversation where you talked about the background of developers here in Amman, and upon this conversation that is always happening in cities that are, in a way, people look at them as extremely dense. As like here, they're talking about like moving some of the faculties or like the governmental buildings into another area, and how they did with Cairo. Do you think that this is, in a way, where we as architects can put ourselves in the conversation, where we could like restructure the public realm? Or do you think that Amman is still not yet saturated with, and you would continue to do these kind of injections into the public space, starting as within as small as the sidewalk, as you have just mentioned? So, and upon the conversation, like referring back to the background of developers, how would you, let's say, if you could sit with them, let's say the conversation or the argument between cost and revenues versus the public experience of the people? Because this is the conversation where it stops and they would start looking at the numbers and costs. And this is where time like goes out with us and we still have to deliver. So yeah, thank you.
I'll answer actually. Let me answer because I will forget the question. So let me answer it. I think what you're saying is very interesting, and this the whole idea of sort of moving the ministries out of Amman to is kind of, it's multifaceted. Now, do we have, as architects, sort of a say in this? I don't think we do. I really don't. I think these are decisions that are done for the sake of practicality, I think, of these entities and so on. But I don't think this idea of, and I repeat it again, this idea of agency, I think is a delusional idea. You know, you can only do things in small incremental parts. You know, you cannot go and impose onto the government here that this is not what you should doing. You should be doing this. This is not going to happen. Okay, it's not realistic. As for the idea that developers sort of, you know, that it's a balance between cost and taste, let's say, I don't think, you know, the more you dish out money is you get better solutions, and there's plenty of expensive buildings I can show them to you that have had tremendous amounts of money thrown in them, and they are absolutely awful. I mean, you just, you know, you don't want to. So it's not like money equals sort of quality. It's not that. It is the sensibility, and this is what I meant when I said, you know, maybe there should be a class on taste, because this allows sort of developers, let's say, to understand what is and what can sell more eventually, you know, how they can position themselves in different ways. So it is about kind of, you know, injecting sort of design sensibility into the public, and, you know, somehow disseminating sort of ideas about aesthetics and things like that, that may allow these developers to be a little bit more mindful when they do the buildings. And not only them, but the architects that, you know, fulfill their visions.
There's two rows. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciated your honesty about the existential time that we live in, and I'm wondering, you know, how does that impact your design, like your approach to architecture? Like, I'm thinking about billionaires and building bunkers underground, or even how can we respond to space? And are there spaces for you to create like subversive injections or interferences to what you were speaking with vis-a-vis, you know, like the existential moment or time we live in?
We can definitely, I think.
سلام، سوار العتيق. I was wondering how you balance between Sahel Al Hiyari, the person with his beliefs, his own visions, and since we was being honest, in a materialistic world with the one at the end of the day who pays, like how you balance between being Sahel, the person, and Sahel, the architect who do architecture as a job for living, for survive. Like we know now in a materialistic world, the power at the end of the day for the one who owns the money. So, did you understand?
No, I didn't understand the question, but this personal Sahel and the Sahel architect are one of the same people. There is no difference. I mean, I may suffer from slight schizophrenia sometimes, seeing certain things that, you know, that drive you insane. But, you know, in this case, I think I've managed to maintain kind of a unified persona. I don't know how to answer this question. It's just I honestly, like the way I work, and I have to say it. I mean, the way I work when I do a project, I draw the line and I sit with my architects, and Laith is here, who has been working with me for 20 plus years, and we look at the space and we see how I feel in the space. I really always imagine how am I feeling in the space? What is the space telling me? It has nothing to do with kind of, how do you say, notoriety of being a famous architect or, you know, being published. I mean, that's the last thing I look for. I don't even go out in public and talk. This is
an exception.
This
is really an exception.
An exception because I love Darat al-Funun and I appreciate really the place here. So that is an exception. So I don't think about these things. I mean, I'm very devoted to what I do. I love what I do. And I guess sometimes it loves me back and sometimes it doesn't. It's like, a relationship that I have with my career. You cannot kind of think of these aspects, how am I balancing sort of the Sahel, the person, and it's all one thing, really. And honestly, it is like that. I only look at work, I mean, at whatever it is I'm doing, this becomes the most important thing. How else can I remix this? I mean, there's no other way to explain it. And I forgot the other questions.
The first question was about, you know, in this kind of really looming existential kind of threat, how do you?
I have designed things during that time, ideas. I have designed bunkers, yes. You hit on a... I have designed things. You design things on the side to be able to, as a coping mechanism. I have done that, you know. But also, I have a job. I have to deliver work for people, and that's what I do. So I don't sit in a corner paralyzed, but I also don't have this overtly optimistic kind of vision of future in general. I mean, you know. So,
should we take one more question or two more questions? I think. Should we take the final two questions? So, there and there. I think as it comes and just kind of because I think there is a concept that actually in our own conversations on that last question that actually came up several times, and it is that of inheritance, kind of. You know, also to think of actually architecture, and I think this is a point that you brought up several times, which I think in answer to that question was quite interesting. That
because everything you do, actually, when you think of heritage, we always think of old buildings, but heritage actually is something alive, and it's transforming and is evolving as we evolve and produce and pull out. So, you know, whatever that you're pulling out of yourself from your deep thoughts or whatever has to be the best. You have to give your best. This is it in a nutshell. So every act you do is an act of heritage. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Mohammed Said Ahmed. I have a question. In the first like 20 minutes or such, you mentioned the word memory like 6 times. And you mentioned that you're not reviving, neither translating, you're mostly transactioning some of the ideas. It reminded me of a piece for a Japanese architect called Tezuka Takahara about nostalgic future. And I wonder how Sahel sees our urban spaces now, like Cairo, Man, Riyadh, all of these cities. If we manage to take an image of memory of everyone, how you think after 30 or 40 years we will look back at our spaces today, and what would be our nostalgia about it, or there will be none?
I mean, the reference is interesting because I'm currently working on an article about nostalgia, and this whole idea of future nostalgia is very interesting. Nostalgia as a condition that underlines the important aspects that have been sort of removed from a certain context. If you look at nostalgia this way, it's very interesting. As for Amman and the public spaces, Amman is, I mean, the urbanism of Amman has stopped a long time ago. I mean, what we are living is a condition of sprawl, of unmitigated expansion without any kind of clear or formal understanding of what public space is. Public space in Amman has become, you know, the side of the airport road where people go and sit there for lack of places to be in, you know. So Amman does need sort of a strategy for its people. I mean, and this is where the social responsibility comes in, is that you need to provide these public spaces for people within the planning schemes that are happening. And I think this is Muhammad, right? Listen, I don't know the rest of the question, but I don't know if I answered it or I went off in a...
I think he was asking, yeah, and kind of just maybe the only part of the question is actually when you look at the spaces, you know, as that we're looking at as heritage, what is it that we can read of our cities?
Sorry to interrupt. So my question was a little bit different. So I referenced that book for also another reason. When it was published, it critiques the cultural space of cities, etc. But at the same time, publishing that book, we had a new political space of Make America Great Again, for example. But the thing is that moving forward, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, if we look back at what Sahel concluded his talk with, that if we look at our present, it's very dystopian. So is that the nostalgia, or is that the memory we have to abide by? Or can we create a different memory now or tomorrow that can change the course of our future memories? That was the core of my question. If we take an image 30 years from now, what's the ideal memory Sahel envisions?
You're treating memory as if that there is no selection process, right? I mean, memory is selective also. I mean, we all have, you know, you remember what you want to remember, what's worthy of remembering, and then you forget what's worthy, what needs to be forgotten. And I think if we will move like 30 years from now and see kind of the expansion of Amman as a memory, I think that would be problematic because we would be stuck in this kind of Kafkaesque cycle of reproducing the same thing again and again and again and again. So I think it's about also the process of selection, right? And being open kind of to the idea of time and history, not as a linear one, but as something more compressed, right? So if you look, for example, at, I mean, I look at ancient Egyptian temples all the time. I mean, sometimes it comes through in my work, right? So what I'm saying is, I guess, it's the capacity of allowing yourself to sort of gain these memories or experience these things, and then recasting them in new forms. But it's not a memory that you not all memory is kind of automatic in the way you describe it, I guess.
I think we'll take one concluding question, if there is any. There.
مرحبا أنا سهيلة. So my question is about the feeling.
بدي أغلبك if you can just keep the mic a bit closer.
Okay. So you said that in order to design a building, you have to sit and imagine yourself. How would you feel in this space? And regarding the topic of like the taste clash between the developers, the public, and the architects, I think it all comes and boils down to feelings. What the feeling or what the building should evoke in humans in general. So what do you feel? What is my question? But what I want to say is the feeling is why everyone is very divided on like how the building should look like. Nowadays, what we look like, or what the developers, or what like let's say the clients or the people with the power to pay wants the noise or the feeling that the building should heighten some emotions. While we go back and look at the timeless buildings and the buildings that have the longevity to stand centuries and civilizations, they always are associated with the feeling of calmness. They just turn people connect to them because they bring them to a balanced state. And it's also like a field I'm very interested in, which is neuroarchitecture. I would like to hear what you think about this subject, neuroarchitecture, and what you think how we can bring the feeling of calm and settledness to modernity and how we design buildings nowadays and public spaces in general. Thank you.
It's interesting what you're saying, and I think that needs another session on its own to talk about that. I mean, I certainly don't sit and think, you know, how am I going to balance the kind of modernity with the developer and with this person or the other person. I mean, it's just an automatic thing that happens to me. I walk through the floor plans I design, and you're right. I mean, I think the sense of calmness is very important, and then an engagement and sense of there has to be a striking moment. So it's not only one feeling, it's a choreography of emotions that buildings should have. And this is what keeps people going back to certain buildings, right? I mean, you know, classical antiquity had that, right? From its larger spaces to the smallest spaces. So, yeah, I mean, but it's a topic that you have to research as well, and let's leave it at that.
I think, I mean, first of all, kind of the point that you don't speak a lot, I would really like to thank you for being here with us today. This was, I mean, also I think a very kind of honest reflection, which I think is not always easy to make, especially when you're in the thick of practice. So I really appreciate that. I thank all the attendants for coming here today, and hopefully there will be another session.
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا.